let's do a crash course on punctuation. So we're going to be talking about punctuation. We're mainly going to focus on commas because commas have a tendency to sneak themselves into places that they don't belong or just not show up in the sentence at all because people just don't know how to use them. And so we're going to be talking about those as well as some other pieces of punctuation in this video. So the first thing we're going to talk about is punctuation with participle phrases. So a participle phrase occurs in a sentence when it is describing the subject, okay? That's the purpose of a participle phrase. And so we will have a participle phrase plus a comma and then an independent clause. So a good way to know that we have a participle phrase is if our sentence starts with an ing word. That's usually a really good signal that our sentence is starting with a participle phrase. So let's look at this sentence. Walking on the beach, comma, Dolores dodged the jellyfish that had washed ashore. So right here, Dolores is our subject, and what this participle phrase is doing is it's giving us more information about our subject. It's giving us context. We now know that Dolores is walking on the beach, and because we've started our sentence with that participle phrase, we have a comma before we get to our subject, Dolores. So like I said, the ing word at the beginning of the sentence is a good signal that we might be starting our sentence with a participle phrase. The next thing we need to talk about are non-restrictive relative clauses. So what non-restrictive relative clauses do is they provide more information than is necessary, and they can be left out of a sentence without affecting its meaning or structure. So non-restrictive relative clauses are set apart by commas. That's super important to keep in mind and know about. And good signals are words like which and who. Those are good signals that we have non-restrictive relative clauses. So let's look at this first sentence. A list of contents would have made it easier to steer through the book, comma, which also lacks a map. So this information following the comma, which also lacks a map, isn't necessary for us to understand the meaning of the whole sentence. So it's extra information. It's not necessary. We don't need it. And that's why we set it apart by the comma. We can look at this next one. Bill, comma, who had fallen asleep on the sofa, comma, suddenly roused himself. So this is extra information that occurs between the two commas that's giving us more information about the situation, but more information that is necessary. So if it occurs in the middle of the sentence and not at the end like this first one, we will have two commas, one at the beginning of the non-restrictive relative clause and one at the end of it. And if you take that out, Bill suddenly roused himself, that's a sentence by itself. This right here is just extra information. So that's how we do non-restrictive relative clauses. I always encourage you to either mark through, cover up this information, and read the sentence without it and see if it's necessary or not. All right, now we can talk about commas in complex sentences. If you watch the video on sentence types, these next few are going to be a review for you, but again, that's how important knowing where to put commas is and other different pieces of punctuation is, so I want to go over them. I strongly encourage you to write down these formulas. So when we have a complex sentence, if the independent clause comes first, as it does in this sentence here, we do not need a comma. We just write the independent clause and the dependent clause. Emma studied for her favorite playlist Emma listened to her favorite playlist while she studied for the exam. Now, if we flip-flop the order, which is cool to do, it can make your writing a little bit more interesting so you don't follow the same pattern, same formula. You flip-flop it and say, while she studied for the exam first, we need that comma. If that dependent clause comes first, we must have a comma. So while she studied for the exam, comma, Emma listened to her favorite playlist. So memorize these two formulas for complex sentences so you know when to put a comma in versus when to not put a comma in a complex sentence. Now let's talk about commas in compound sentences. So when to use only a comma in a compound sentence, because we're going to look at the next slide is going to tell us about some other punctuation mixed in as well. So we use a comma in a compound sentence only if we are joining our two independent clauses together with a coordinating conjunction or a fanboy. We always have a comma before that coordinating conjunction or fanboys, that for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So we have the sentence, the shoplifter had stolen clothes, comma, so he ran once he saw the police. They chased after him, comma, but he got away. Now, if you need help with punctuation of compound and complex sentences, I strongly encourage you to go back and watch the video on simple compound and complex sentences. That'll give you a little bit more information, but here's just a review of when to use a comma only. Now, when we use a semicolon and a comma is when we have a conjunctive adverb in our sentence joining those two independent clauses or two simple sentences. So here you'll see the shoplifter had stolen clothes, semicolon, therefore that's a conjunctive adverb, comma, he ran once he saw the police. Conjunctive adverbs will always be hugged by punctuation. They will be led by a semicolon and followed by a comma. Keep that in mind, that punctuation is super important. Like I said, if you need more information on punctuating compound sentences, strongly encourage you to go back and review that video on simple, compound, and complex sentences. The last rule is the easiest one. I saved it for last because it's the one we are taught at the youngest age and we all know well. And that is when we use commas to separate items in a series. So whenever we have a series or a list of 3 or more items in a sentence, we use commas to separate them. We will go skydiving, comma, swimming, comma, and fishing while on vacation. So that just helps the reader to kind of see the list in their mind better and break those things apart. So those are really helpful and beneficial as well. But just a review of that final rule. Like I said, go back and watch that other video if you need any other help with compound and complex sentences. But I encourage you to memorize the formulas like this one here. Okay, because that will help you a lot when it comes to writing your different sentences. So best of luck on using commas correctly in a sentence. I know that you can find where they belong, and these rules will help make that a lot easier for you.